Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories. The unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. That is correct, everyone. Just like it says in the intro, I am Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. I hope everyone's had a happy holidays so far and is headed toward a wonderful new year. I've got one heck of a classic whodunit true crime story coming right up for you. It's a story I found in the November 1925 issue of True Detective Mysteries, as told by Detective William D. Roddy of the New York Police, who was on the case, and as narrated by Isabel Stephen. Here's the teaser. For months, the skeleton of an unknown girl had lain in the Islip woods, a bullet hole in the skull. But who was she? Who killed her? And for what motive? If you'd like to know the answer to those questions, well then, please join me now as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Kinda Murderies, a mysterious skull in the Islip woods, starts now. Homicide over at Islip, Long Island. John P. Coughlin, then a captain in charge of the New York Detective Bureau, handed me a slip of paper on which he'd scribbled a few lines. I say me, and that probably makes you wonder just who the heck I am. Me, I've got no reason to hide my identity, so I'll share it with you. I'm Detective William D. Roddy of the New York Police Department. So like I said, Captain John Coughlin, he handed me a slip of paper on which he'd scribbled a few lines, and then he added tersely, "Looks like a newspaper romance story. Probably one of the patients from the insane asylum who wandered away and committed suicide. Reporters are out there in flocks, already keeping the murderer, if there is a murderer, well informed of all the details of the discovery. Why don't you take a run over there with Thomas Murray? See this man, Charles Daly the Undertaker, who seems to be a sort of an amateur sleuth and has the body at his place. Listen, Roddy, this is the first murder mystery Islip's had in over 20 years, and the villagers are all excited over it." I accepted the assignment and hunted up Murray in the squad room, and with him I caught the 12:51 p.m. train for Islip. In the morning newspapers, I'd read one of the accounts which my chief had referred to, and like him, I'd been rather amused by the imaginative yarn. Big news happened to be scarce just then, and the finding of a richly clothed and bejeweled skeleton in the great scrub oak wastes of Long Island had lent itself beautifully to extravagant journalistic fictionalization. The find had been made 2 days before by a little boy hunting huckleberries. The skeleton had a wisp of flaxen hair, a blue velvet ribbon, a few trinkets, and some storm-faded clothing, and the newshounds immediately sniffed out a sensational tragedy. A body in the woods almost a year. Who was the girl? Who could have killed her? What motive could have prompted the act? These were my thoughts, of course, but all in good time, I told myself. No use jumping to any hasty conclusions. In midsummer, Bayshore, Islip, and Amityville are attractive places. Good automobile roads run through shady green woods. Brilliant blue vistas of the Sound and great placid water lily ponds add exquisite touches to an otherwise monotonous stretch of flat country. But on that morning of October 10th, 1909, when Murray and I speeded toward the home of America's most famous insane asylum, a dun, misty haze hung over gaunt trees which fall had almost stripped bare. Nearing our destination, we passed through an even more desolate country where acres of scrub had been blackened by fire. "Hey, how about we visit a lunchroom before attacking the Undertaker?" Murray suggested. "I didn't have any dinner. What about you?" "Sounds good to me," I replied. I was just finishing my report when the chief rang for me. Some ham and eggs and coffee will make a good foundation. Must be some sort of eating place here for the relatives of the patients at Central Islip. Islip, we discovered when we got off the train and walked a few blocks of country road where houses were in the course of construction, had a lively Main Street thoroughfare. A spick-and-span beanery stood on one corner, and without further investigation we entered and ordered the good old standby. "You young men from the newspapers?" the rosy-cheeked waitress asked after she'd taken our orders. Without directly committing ourselves to any special newspaper, Murray and I permitted the damsel to retain her delusion and requested her to hurry up with the eats. "You newspaper boys are always in a hurry," she remarked with a flip of her starched skirts as she flounced off. "But maybe I could tell you something interesting about that murder case," she flung over her shoulder before disappearing through swinging doors, which evidently led to the kitchen. "This village must be a nest of amateur sleuths," said Murray. "At that, she might be able to tell us something, though. Might as well get it from all sides, am I wrong?" When the waitress returned with 2 large platters laden with good thick slices of nicely crisped ham and fried eggs, Murray's irritability evaporated. "And what could you tell us, sis?" he asked with a benign smile, at the same time making an assault on the dish placed before him. "Now don't tell us if you don't want to." Murray anticipated her coy evasions and cute desire to be coaxed. His gambit won out. After a moment's hesitation, she replied, "Well, we live out on the road a bit, not far from where the body was found, and last Thanksgiving Eve I was working in the kitchen with Ma on account of my uncle and aunt and cousins and gentleman friend coming to dinner the next day. Round midnight we heard an automobile go tearing past and a girl screeching piteously. Oh, just piteously." Her eyes rolled in horror at the recollection. "Oh, hell, there ain't nothing in that," scoffed a big beetle-browed man who'd been standing near the cash register. "It's not likely that body to lay undiscovered for nearly a year. Don't be giving out yarns like that. They'll be calling you up as a witness and taking your time off from your work here. I won't stand for that, Marie. You're just seeking notoriety."
"Well, of all the nerve," the girl snorted angrily. "And just who are you, anyway? Guess if they investigate a few of our local sheiks right here in Islip, they might uncover a few things. I ain't mentioning any names yet, but I don't mean to be insulted." The man behind the counter flushed, his eyes darting furious sparks at the waitress, who looked him straight in the face. Their silence spoke volumes. "Don't believe there's anything there," I remarked to Murray as we left the place. "The mustachioed Romeo is probably an ex-beau of hers. There's always a bunch of skylarkers around a little town like this." A police officer directed us to Undertaker Daly's place with a knowing grin. "I guess you'll find him right there, too," he added. "He's a busy man these days." We found Charles Daly's home and undertaking establishment in the middle of an attractive block of comfortable residences. Late roses bloomed in front yards, and neatly clipped box hedges bordered well-kept small lawns. Fortunately, we found the undertaker alone. Instead of being the fussy little busybody we'd pictured, he was a singularly dignified man of middle-aged, immaculately groomed. Premature white hair covered his head, and a short-cropped white mustache outlined a well-shaped mouth. Large hazel eyes, somewhat bloodshot, regarded us quizzically as we made ourselves known. "Don't you want to come into the house?" He invited us in with a little close-lipped smile. "It'll be far more comfortable there, and I can show you the remains later on." The office was a very small one, flat-top desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and that filled it. On the wall hung a huge, gruesome-looking anatomical chart. Outside of this was a barn-like space with an undertaker's wagon and several boxed coffins standing up around the farther end. We agreed that the house would be more comfortable on that bleak, drizzly afternoon in October. Seated in cozy overstuffed chairs, we listened to the undertaker's story. "It was Saturday afternoon when I first learned of the discovery," he began. "The weather was mild and we were sitting on the porch when the telephone rang around 4 o'clock. My phone rings pretty constantly, for I have several sidelines. I would hate to sit around waiting for cases to come in," he explained apologetically. "Well, then when I lifted the receiver, I heard Dr. Savage's voice on the phone. He's our coroner and a great friend of mine. Nick Havens just called up to say that the little Schmidt boy found some bones in the scrub oak lots behind Sayville and Brentwood a little while ago," Dr. Savage said. "He's had a look at them, and he says they've probably lain there for years. Will you send a man out there with a box tomorrow to gather them up and bury them?" he asked. "Why, I can go right now if you'd like, Doctor," the undertaker had offered. "Do you want to go along?" "No," he answered. "Nick says the bones have evidently been there for years, all scattered all over the place, probably one of the patients who wandered away some long time back. Since they've lain there so many years, another night won't hurt 'em." "Well, there's a lot of truth to that," the undertaker informed us. "Nick Havens is our town constable and deputy sheriff. He's a pretty old fellow, but very reliable. And if it was just some old scattered bones, it wasn't use making a big fuss over 'em. So the next morning, that was yesterday, I sent 2 of my men with a box and a shovel to get the bones. I had a case down the street where I had to deliver a coffin. Now, I can't explain it, but I had a hunch that I'd better go out to the scrub lots and have a look at those bones before the men buried them. I didn't really expect to find anything, but I had my wagon out, and before putting it up, I decided to drive over. I passed my men on the road and took them along with me. We called at the Schmidt house to get the little boy to show us where the body was. Mrs. Schmidt was sitting on her porch polishing a gold watch. "Well, that's a pretty watch," I said to her. "A present?" "Well, no, not exactly," she admitted. "Johnny found it near them bones when he was huckleberrying yesterday." "You shouldn't have taken it," I told her. "You should have left everything just as it was." But it seemed that Sheriff Nick had told her it was all right. However, I made her give me the watch, and inside it was a blurred bit of photograph and the initials AL scratched on the case. "Why, this may even lead to the identity of the body," I told her. She gave up the watch reluctantly and called to little Johnny to accompany us to the Scrub Oak lots. Here, Officer Murray interrupted the recital. "Hey, how did the kid come to find the bones?" he asked. "What was he doing in the scrub lots?" "He'd gone huckleberrying Sunday afternoon," Undertaker Daly explained. "His mother had some friends in, and she'd given him a pail and sent him to give him something to do. She told him to fill the pail for supper, and she'd give him a dime. An hour later, he came screeching back that he'd found a skeleton in the woods. They all went out and looked at it. Then they went down to their next-door neighbor, John Parks, who lives about a half a mile away, and carried the information to Nick Havens in Brookville. Nick called up the coroner, and after he'd viewed the bones, the coroner called me up, as I explained already. "Well, when you arrived at the spot, what did you find?" I asked. Coroner Daly got that slightly far-away look of a man remembering something he'd seen and maybe wished he hadn't. The skull was lying a couple of feet away from the rest of the body. You could see the foxes had been busy at it, and the scrub fire of last July had burned all around it. But funny thing is, it hadn't hurt the body much. I picked up the skull, which had some flaxen blonde hair on it, and I heard something fall. I thought it was a trinket or something. Though the clothes were all storm-faded with the rains and the snows, and the shoes had been gnawed by foxes, I could tell that they'd been smart clothes, and they were too elaborate to belong to any of the patients at Islip Asylum. Just some poor woman who'd wandered into the scrub and gotten lost, I figured at first. Then I found that little thing that had fallen out when I'd lifted the skull was a bullet. That naturally suggested murder, but the bullet hole in the forehead didn't cover a vital spot, so it was possible the poor thing had committed suicide and had crawled quite a bit and died from the loss of blood. "Then how is it that you publicly declared that it's a murder? How did the coroner come to send in that report to headquarters?" Murray demanded. "Wait a bit, I haven't finished," the Undertaker said calmly. "We looked all around and picked up everything that seemed connected with the body. We carried the skeleton and the clothes and a bracelet and a little pendant necklace that had apparently been around her neck back to my wagon. On arrival at my establishment, I made a more careful examination, and I found another bullet embedded in the back of the skull. Now, as I'm sure you gentlemen are aware, it's practically an impossibility for anybody to fire a bullet into the back of his or her skull," finished the Undertaker triumphantly. "That's so," I agreed. "Let's have a look at it." The haze had become a heavy drizzle while we talked, and though the undertaking establishment was only a few steps away from the house, the clammy mist penetrated our clothes before we'd entered this place of the dead. In a pine coffin on a trestle, the remains of the mysterious blonde woman had been laid. Nothing but bones with a few locks of curly flaxen hair, bound about the skull with grisly coquettishness by black velvet ribbon, fashionably cut coat of some rich material, silk blouse, and remnants of fluffy underwear filled the last resting place of the unknown. On a small table which stood beside the coffin was a box containing various articles: a silver thimble, a pair of folding scissors, a small piece of paper. "Those are the things I took out of her pocket," Mr. Daly explained. I selected the paper and looked at it closely. It was some sort of bill head, but the print had been almost entirely obliterated. "Looks like a bill for goods," I said half to myself. "Yes, well, that's what it is," Daly retorted. "The firm name seems to be Cokes and Fine. There's a store near the asylum that used to belong to a man of the name of Coke, and he sold out to a man named Fine. I took the bill over there, but Fine tells me that it's only a coincidence, that it isn't their billhead, that it comes from Germany." Daly stopped for a minute. Then, reaching out, he gently but emphatically took the piece of paper from me. "Dr. Savage, the coroner, is sending that to the German minister tonight," he advised. "Hands off our clues."
he implied without actually saying those words. It was rather plain that while Mr. Daly was obliging and polite, he didn't altogether appreciate our assistance. Without any super intuition, I sensed that the officials of the village of Islip felt that they were quite capable of handling their own murder. I didn't want to antagonize the man, so without further remarks, I was about to turn away when I spied a label on the coat at the neck. "You don't mind if I take this?" I requested quietly, and proceeded without permission to rip off the tag. "We want something to work on, don't want to return to headquarters empty-handed. By the way," I continued, "I heard there was a very noisy party passing through Brookville last Thanksgiving Eve with a woman screaming for help." "Oh yes, I remember," Mr. Daly replied in an offhand sort of way. "There was a lot of talk about it at the time. We are quiet folks around here, much inclined to mind our own business, but that party passed right through the village. Nobody ever connected any idea of murder with it at the time." "Hey, listen, Doc, if you give us a full description of the body and the identification marks you found on it, I don't believe we'll have to trouble you any further just now," Murray put in. He'd been roaming around the place, picking up various small articles and examining them closely. In his hand he held a rich silk automobile scarf. "Well, certainly," replied the obliging Daly. "You're welcome to this copy I made out. On it I've noted every detail. I'm sure that I missed nothing." "Well, that's good." Murray thanked him, reaching out for the typewritten slip. "We just have time to make the 4:30 and get in our report. Thanks for your help. Keep in touch with us, though, won't you? And we'll let you know how we're getting along." "Well, surely," Daly replied. Murray was right about catching the train, of course, but we'd seen a lot of reporters in town. I had to ask Daly a couple more questions before we departed. "Do you think it's advisable to let the newspapers keep such close touch with what you're doing, though?" I asked Daly. "Won't it give the murderer a chance to make a getaway?" I chose this tack with Daly for a reason. You have to be so darn careful when you're dealing with the local authorities. They're jealous of their rights, and they can do more to gum up the works than you can do to clear 'em if you don't take the right angle with the villagers. "Maybe," Daly agreed, "but how are we going to identify the remains if we don't advertise them?" he asked triumphantly. Something in his voice stopped us from leaving. "Who's going to identify the skeleton?" Murray must have caught the same tone as myself, for he put the question as an insinuating taunt. "Well, a man and a woman came here this morning from New Jersey," Daly said, swallowing the bait. "They wouldn't tell me who they were, but from the way they whispered together, I guessed they suspected who she was." I nearly blushed from embarrassment. This was the most important piece of information, and we'd almost missed it. One thing I was sure of, and that was that Daly knew more than he'd told us. "How'd you know they came from Jersey, then?" Murray asked. "Well, they wanted to see Dr. Savage, the coroner, and he was out on a case," Daly reluctantly admitted. "The woman, without thinking, said they'd come all the way over from Jersey and didn't want to go back without seeing him. But they didn't want reporters to get onto them, so they said they'd just come over again, and then just then a young man came in, and they jumped in their car and hurried off." "Did you take the number?" I asked. "Oh, yes, I did," he admitted. "I wrote it down. Here it is." He entered his small office and picked up a scrap of paper which was weighted down on his desk by a whiskey glass full of buckshot. Murray, who had followed him, took a notebook out of his pocket, and glancing at the inscription Daly showed him, copied it down. "Much obliged again," I heard him say. "That all you can tell us?" "Well, that's everything," the undertaker returned shortly. "Well, goodbye then." We shook hands with the amateur sleuth and made a wild dash to catch the 4:30 train, which was even then heralding its approach with great clouds of smoke puffing through the tops of the trees a mile away. "That undertaker's one canny operator," Murray remarked as we reached the station and raced over the tracks just as the 4:30 pulled in. The train was filled with husky railroad laborers, earth-caked and grimy. The plush seats were dusty and damp, and the air musty and malodorous. "Phew!" Murray snorted. "Let's walk through and see if we can find ourselves a better atmosphere." The laborers occupied the two front coaches exclusively. Further back, we could get a glimpse of some empty seats and a better class of passenger. Sitting in the third seat of the third car was a tall, dark man dressed in correct afternoon clothes, black cutaway coat, and a silk hat. Somebody going to a late afternoon wedding was the idea which flashed through my mind, but suddenly I sensed something vaguely familiar about his face. "Well, what do you think of that?" Murray said to me in an undertone as we sank into one of the clammy plush seats. "You see that guy in the top hat? That's the lunchroom Romeo." As a matter of fact, the man from the diner had completely passed from my mind. I'd like to know where he's going all dolled up in Fifth Avenue duds, I remarked to Murray. Uh-huh, Murray grunted. Seeking new fields to conquer, maybe. Well, let's see this description of what Mr. Daly calls the remains. Murray took the typewritten sheet from his inner breast pocket, and after glancing over it with concentrated swiftness, he gave it to me with a chuckle. For an amateur sleuth, Charles Daly's pretty good. I don't believe he's missed a darn thing. But there is a lot here that he didn't mention. He startled a quiet little old lady across the aisle from us as he gave a short, sharp laugh. The description was comprehensive. It read, "On subjecting the skull to a most careful scrutiny, I found the place where the bullet had entered to be on the right side in front of the ear and at the point where the jawbone hinges. The course of the bullet was not easy to follow. Another bullet had been fired into the rear of the skull. I made a careful examination of the clothing and teeth. There were 12 of the latter left. Bicuspid tooth on the upper left side of the jaw, crowned with gold. 3 front teeth in upper jaw had been filled. 1 had been filled twice with amalgam and the other 2 once each. Malformed teeth in lower jaw setting in close behind one another. Clothes. Corset of black silk, made to order according to local expert who was consulted. Shirtwaist of black taffeta, with embroidery. Autoscarf of tan. Shoes size 4 or 5, name of maker obliterated by rain and snows. Coat of black broadcloth lined with gray satin. Jewelry. Chain with locket in which was diamond. Watch. Swiss, gold, heavily chased, stopped at 12:30. Watch has various marks of jewelers who have repaired it. Small gold locket with tassel of pearls. Gold bracelet with pearls and diamonds. Receipted bill for goods printed in Krebel, Prussia, dated 1908. Small guidebook issued by Hamburg American Line. I read over the list several times. Woman was probably slightly over 30 years of age. Height, 5'7", weight 130 pounds. Mr. Daly had written his conclusions at the foot of the list. Well, that murderer wasn't afraid of leaving clues behind him, that's for sure, I remarked in a low tone to Murray. Unless, he suggested, someone murdered the woman meaning to rob her and was scared off in some way. You know, when we first went in there, the case looked like it was going to be one of those impenetrable mysteries, but, now we seem to be burdened with a wealth of clues. It's hard to know which one to tackle first. Indeed, with so many possible leads, Detectives Roddy and Murray would have to start somewhere. But where would that be? If you'd like to find out, please do rejoin me this Sunday, December 31st, 2023, New Year's Eve, for Part 2 of A Mysterious Skull in the Islip Woods. Until then, I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.
If you like the show, please subscribe, review, and tell your friends. You can find us on social media at Kinda Murdery or email at kindamurdery@gmail.com.